President Trump spoke to reporters Monday night, but did not provide an update on the United States' response to a suspected chemical attack in Syria. Earlier Monday, Defense Secretary James Mattis told reporters that he is not ruling out any possibilities. Retired U.S. Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer joins me now from Washington. So, Colonel, we saw the U.S. respond with airstrikes after a Syrian chemical attack in 2017. Right. And the president said Monday morning he is considering that option again. What other military responses, if any, are the Trump administration and military officials likely considering at this point?
Well, and I think they're considering non-traditional responses as well. Syria is a basket case, and we have to look at both the timing of this event relating to the fact that why would Assad do this? He was actually winning. This part of the town he attacked, supposedly, the rebels were moving out. So we have to look at the chemical itself. This was a combination of something called lindane and chlorine. It's a poor man's sarin, if you will. It has nowhere near the effects of sarin, but it does kill. So we have to examine this like Sherlock Holmes would examine a crime scene. And look, I'm not a fan of the Russians, but the Russians are saying it wasn't Assad. We have to look at that seriously. I do believe that if we can figure out who the perpetrator was, there will be a very severe and direct response. Some of that may be things the American public does not see, at least immediately, regarding special operations forces and also the French. The French have also been very active in the region, and I think we may see a joint response with the French taking the lead. So there's a number of options on the table. The big issue, obviously, is before you shoot, you must be very clear on what target you're going after.
You mentioned Russia. President Trump did place some of the blame for the alleged attack on Russian President Vladimir Putin and Iran. Russia has said there is no evidence of an attack, and the president promised there would be a, quote, big price to pay. Nevertheless, what might President Trump be alluding to there?
Well, look, the Russians have been a competitor in a region. If any nation has direct responsibility for Assad, it's the Russians. The Russians have continued to prop him up. They've armed him. Frankly, as you may recall, Elaine, the Obama administration worked with the Assad regime and the Russians to remove all the supposed gas, all the sarin. So either they got it all or they didn't. The Russians say they got it all. So then, again, we have to figure out where did this come from. There's something called precursors. I think one of the things, I can't go into a lot of detail, but I do know that normally what the intelligence community looks for is precursors. Where would the staging area have been? Where did the chemicals come from? So that will be a big determining factor regarding the response. We find the Russians were playing both sides, and of course I think the Russians may suffer consequences. Those could come in the form of additional sanctions or issues relating to Syria. We have to be very careful with this, though, because on a daily basis we have Russian forces and U.S. forces fighting the common enemy of ISIS and Syria. So we have to be very careful that this does not get out of control and we start having U.S. forces fire on Russians or vice versa.
As you know, this is all taking place as President Trump has publicly discussed pulling U.S. forces out of Syria. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders addressed that issue Monday. Let's listen to some of what she said.
Sure.
The president wants to bring our troops home after we complete the mission to eradicate ISIS in Syria. At the same time, he wants to make sure Assad is deterred from chemical weapons attacks on innocent civilians. Signaling we want to remove our troops in no way degrades our ability to hold parties responsible.
What's your assessment of that, Colonel? Sanders says the president still wants to remove troops from Syria in spite of the alleged attack. If troops are withdrawn, how do you think that would work? The U.S. would try to deter Bashar al-Assad from future chemical attacks.
I actually communicated with one of the individuals in that meeting with the president last week, and what was discussed were the options. The president wanted to know what our mission is. One of the problems with other administrations is mission creep. So he asked the hard question, what are we doing there? And then he demanded essentially what are our options and what can we do to both bring stability to the region as well as ensure the defeat of ISIS. One of the big things that he's talked about, he actually talked about in his Riyadh speech, is an Arab NATO, the idea of having other forces other than U.S. forces come in as a stabilizing troops. And the other ally we've had in the region, of course, is the Peshmerga and the Kurds. So I think what the president's demanded are options other than U.S. forces being that which brings the stability long term. So I'm in agreement. I think we have to be very cautious of the deployment missions of our troops. We must defeat our enemies. At the same time, we cannot afford to have the American military serve as an indefinite police force in the region.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Colonel, thanks very much for your perspective.
Thank you,
Really
Elaine.
appreciate it.
Thank you.